Let me tell you about these family environments. We've learned over the course of doing these trainings that we only need to put up one bullet point, right? Man with a gun, suicide, gender differences in trauma, parenting, and these are so resonant to us that we can talk about them all day. So I appreciate it. I want to hear your experiences. I'm going to say a little bit more about parenting environments. Oh, yeah. Let me go. I'll skip it. Yeah. I'll come back to this. Because that's what we're talking about is family environments. So what happens is these childhood risk factors, these self-control problems, which I just skipped through, there are self-control problems that happen, right? Naturally, people are just different. Some people have trouble delaying gratification. Some people have trouble thinking before they act. Some people get emotional in a larger and more dramatic way than others. Some people have trouble just organizing their mind and problem solving and planning, and those are all differences that make us interesting people. When you have trouble self-regulating, self-control, and you meet a family environment that is difficult, it causes problems. So let me tell you about a few of these family environments. There are neglectful environments, and Tony Shirley had a neglectful environment. And what happens when you have a neglectful environment is the child fails to learn to soothe themselves. Children learn to soothe themselves because we first soothe them. We hold them and we cater to them because they're helpless infants, and then as they get motor skills, we expect them even to turn themselves over. We're not going to go pick you up every time you cry. You can get yourself comfortable. Then we expect them to toilet themselves. Then we expect them to feed themselves, and they learn to soothe because we do it for them first and teach them. If you don't get that, you don't learn how to soothe, you will seek sex and drugs and food and problem behaviors to soothe yourself because you don't learn how to do it naturally. You don't learn to respond to positives when no one's giving you any positives. So if you're not hugged and held and loved and cared for, you are uncomfortable with those things. When you come from an abusive environment, so we're talking about corporal discipline, right? Corporal discipline should be rather passionless and meant for punishment of specific behavior, meant for teaching. I don't necessarily recommend it, but I'm from liberal Seattle, and I realize where I am. But abuse is not being disciplined or taught. Abuse is being beaten just for existing. I'm drunk and you're there, right? I'm big and you're little. I'm weak but powerful, right? You're innocent and helpless, so I'll take it out on you. So that's abuse. And every parent who uses physical punishment, by the way, you have to know what the difference is. If you make a decision, if you tell your daughter to beat her children, you better darn well know that it's just discipline. It is not, boy, that conference was annoying to me, I'm going to go beat somebody, right? Abuse. When you're abused, you don't know how to trust your emotions. Mommy, I'm hungry. Bam. I don't even know what it means to be hungry. Daddy, I'm tired. Burn with a cigarette. I don't know how to be tired. I don't know how to trust myself. You can't learn to predict responses. Learning to predict responses is how we get through the world. I've been driving around with Pastor Green, and he's good at predicting what these crazy Jamaican drivers do. He knows how to predict responses and navigate. And if you can't learn to do that in the emotional world, you're a mess. Chaotic families. Families who care, but don't have their own act together. Right? And then maybe that's many of our families. It's mine sometimes. They're poor models of problem solving. We look to our parents to learn how to solve problems. When they have crisis, when something bad happens, children look to their parents and say, what do we do? And if the family doesn't know what to do, the children know what to do. Yes, sir. Oh, they all, yes, every day. In the same day, in the same month, yes. And then traumatic families. And the traumatic families is important because they do teach you things. They teach you how to survive in the face of trauma, whether it's the family's fault or not. Trauma has visited a family. And you learn survival skills that are important to get through trauma but aren't generally adaptive to the rest of the world. Right? So you're responding to everything like it's a threat and a crisis and life-threatening, and that's just your boss telling you got to stay late. That's just your teacher telling you to do it again. There's no need, right, to scream at the teacher, throw the desk, and run away. She just said, you misspelled those words. But if you're a trauma survivor, these things are all threatening to you. This emotional distress is intolerable. Dissociation, you're separate from your feelings. You're discouraged in traumatic environments, especially when the family is visiting the trauma from you. You're discouraged from being attached to outside people, from telling them anything. You learn to be secretive. All right. Back to Tony. So Tony is, as the gentleman in the back said, coming from a family that is chaotic, neglectful, abusive, and traumatized, right? He has trouble regulating his emotions, regulating his behavior, and regulating his thoughts. So what in the world would give us hope for Tony? What could you hear about Tony that would make you say, I think this kid's going to be okay or could be okay? What are some things that are in the story even? He will talk to an adult if they engage him. What else? He likes to do arts. He can express himself. His mother's in recovery. What else is his mother doing? She seeks help. She goes to church. She comes to the counselor. She comes to the pastor. Frankly, although it's a trauma that the father was arrested for beating her, in the way our societies, mine and yours, protect women, that's a good thing. That someone came and arrested him and removed him from the home for beating this woman. He could still be there, right? Very likely to still be there. So they've been protected from at least the first violent man that lived with them.
I think Tony, in a sense, has not been understood.
Right.
There are some traits that I've seen in Tony that I can recognize in myself when I was a little girl.
Yes.
When I was growing up, I could see demons with my natural eyes.
Yes.
And they are very troublesome.
Yes.
They cause you to do things that you are not aware of.
Yes.
And your parents beat you, but you don't understand why they're beating you.
That's right.
And this demon is around you trying to traumatize you to make you do things that is wrong. And I believe that's what is in Tony. Now, when I got spirit-filled with the Holy Ghost, I saw the demon again. And that allows me to do spiritual warfare.
Yes,
so there are some traits in Tony that are good, that are not being,
That's right.
like the gifts and the talent that he
That's
has,
right.
that we need to pull out of
That's
Tony,
right.
and maybe do some deliverance with Tony to get the demon out.
Amen. Thank you. No one has inquired about the spiritual life of Tony, about his godly life. Tony pushes people away in some ways, so they're afraid to come around him. When children, especially when in our country, when black boys are disruptive in school, everything shuts down. There is no parent-teacher conference. There's emergency expulsion, right? There's a 10-year-old being kicked out of school who clearly has troubles at home. Why is the school not surrounding him and enveloping him and holding him? They're throwing him out. Right? And so this is a problem that people don't understand him. Whoops. So protective factors, what we've been talking about. And so we have some that we know scientifically, and I don't have my the spiritual ones up here because this is my scientific slide, but I should integrate those, huh? Positive parenting. So there's actually only two things that parents need to do, with or without beating. They need to supervise their children. They need to monitor their children. And that's really what I'm talking about when I say parents determine their friends, because they say, who is that? Who is that? This is what my mother would say, have I met his mother? No. Does he go to our church? No. Who is he? So monitoring, right? And warmth. Warmth is the child knows that they're loved and cared for. And it could be hugs and kisses and, my daughter has 2 psychologist parents, so she's got sticker charts and reward systems, and it's ridiculous. So it could be, warmth and praise and rewards, but it could also just be inclusion. Hey boy, I'm going to fix my truck, come out to the yard and help me hold this light. That's warmth. To a child when their father says that, even God help him, my drunk father, that's a beautiful thing. Come help me. Come carry this. Boy, go downstairs and bring me up that jar of pickles, my grandmother would say. Right? Not a hug, not a kiss, not how are you, Davy, how's it going today? Just help me out. Just be in this family and do stuff with us. That's warmth. And you have to have it. School success. Right, we know this. You have to have an education to extricate yourself from these pathways, these negative pathways. Positive peer relationships, we've been talking about. So then my psychologist word, maintaining a normal developmental pathway. That means doing what 10-year-olds do. Being in school, having friends, living in a family, playing, learning, not being in an institution, not being thrown out of school, not being on the street, not being in jail, right? All of those things are incredibly disruptive, and we would have no hope for Tony, but if we heard that Tony was going to school and going to church and playing football, we would be very encouraged. And then you need to delay the onset and the progression of substance use. That's that catalyst I talked about. And the more traumatized the child is, the earlier they start their substance use career. Most children start some kind of substance use career, unfortunately, but we like them to start in their youth, in their late teens and young adulthood. We hope they have some experimentation then if that's what they're going to do, but we hope it's late. But when they start early, I'll talk about in a minute, it disrupts everything in their lives, right? And it makes everything worse. Am I making sense? All right, so we know that Tony's at risk, and we know that we need to protect him. So what do we do? What are some effective solutions? We've been talking for yesterday and this morning about some solutions already. Solutions for healing people in trauma, solutions for taking care of ourselves, and then what are solutions for a child and a family that are broken and in trouble, right? And the thing about Tony is, I didn't meet him as a 10-year-old, right? I have this exercise that I do in my practice where I go back, because what I have in front of me is a surly, tattooed, angry, drunken high teenager who did something horrible to society. He hurt somebody, and everybody's angry at him, and people have thrown him away. And so my practice is, let me go back and see what Tony was like at 10, at 5, right? If I talk to his mother, I'm going to tell me about holding him in your arms and looking into his eyes, and tell me what you hoped when he was born, right? Because that's God in Tony, right? When Tony was innocent, when no one thought any of this was Tony's fault. But that's not when I meet Tony. I meet Tony at 15. Oops. Bad slide order, sorry. So when I meet Tony at 15, this is what's happening. This is too small, so I'll read it to you again. I'll tell you a story. Tony at 15 has been seen in a mental health clinic for several years due to his behavioral problems, depression, and alcohol and drug abuse. He lives with Mom, who first asked for help with Tony when he was repeatedly suspended from school for fighting. So this is typical of mothers I see. I knew he had problems since he first got to school, and no one has helped me, right? Including people like you, Dr. Stewart. Blah, 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 with your talk and your answers. The problem is, Tony began drinking at age 11, alcohol, and smoking ganja at age 12, arrested at age 13 for riding in a stolen car, and at age 14 for assault. He was drinking and smoking ganja daily at age 15 when he was placed in Rio Cobre, I made him Jamaican, after conviction for a third assault. In the facility, he was still a mess, he was irritable. He was released on time because he straightened up a little bit. In Rio Cobre, he was in a constant state of anger and sadness. He had some insight while he was there. It's amazing when you take a 15-year-old and remove them from their drugs and alcohol and let them sit in a structured environment and give them the kind of structure they have. It drives the parents crazy when we work at those facilities because they come and the kids are angels. Oh, Tony won Student of the Week at school and has been put on honor status. Well, I wonder why. So he's motivated when he gets out to try to do better, to go to church, to go to school. At home, though, there are many risks. Here's the problem. We send kids away. It's like sending them through a car wash. They come out shiny and clean, and they go back down the dirt road in the rain, in Seattle anyway, in the rain, and the car is filthy again. So we can clean them up. We can clean them up over and over again until finally we just put them somewhere and clean them up forever. We'll just keep you there, keep you clean and sober and safe. right? And 15, you're not very far removed from that sentence, right? Tony's got maybe one more chance. That next assault is with a knife or a machete or a gun. We'll never see Tony again. We'll pray for Tony if he's alive or if he's dead. So, he's going back home. He has enemies. His friends are constantly pressuring him to join the lifestyle. His mom and boyfriend are still on him. Maybe it's discipline, maybe it's beating. He knows he has a bad temper. He just tries to stay home. He's bored. He returns to his ganja and his alcohol. His mom is at her wit's end. She comes to us and she asks for help. What are some solutions? The Jamaica Youth Risk and Resiliency Behavior Survey I found from 2006, sorry it's a little old, but you guys do a marvelous job of measuring resiliency. In the US we sort of pay attention a little bit to resiliency, but this youth survey was very nice. And it had a conclusion about violence. The second paragraph there. The constant or nearly constant presence in a teen's life of an adult who showed they cared, had high expectations of, or was trusted by the teen appeared to be protective against instigation of violence by the youth. The mere presence of parents in the home was not protective from involvement in violence, but parents must show an interest in the youth's whereabouts, have I met his mother, and the problems they might be facing, right? So attentive, it might be the parents, it might have to be someone else. We know in the child development literature that the presence of a single caring adult, that last sentence says, makes a difference in a teen's life. So she's asking us what to do. So we know in our treatment, our interventions, in our counseling, in our community involvement, there are certain things that work. And here are some of the things that work. Increase the monitoring and the supervision. So the first thing we have to tell Christine is that you have to increase the monitoring and supervision. Parents must increase their own responsible behavior. Do as I do and as not as I say. Do as I say and not as I do. That's what really happens is do as I do, is what I'm saying. Do as I say and not as I do doesn't really work, by the way. Right? If the parents have to do the same behavior as the kid, including regulating their behavior. Right? As I would get, you do not hit your sister from my mother, the little logical future psychologist would say, how are you teaching me not to hit by hitting me? I don't get it. All I'm learning is the big person hits the small person when they don't do what they want. I got a small person, you've taught me to hit her if she doesn't do what I want. Logic, science, that I would just get, the smart mouth wouldn't help. Predictable rewards and punishment, right? Why do we give to our children and why do we punish our children? To teach them. By the way, you punish to suppress behavior and reward to increase behavior. And what the scientist in me tells you is you have to give 5 times as many rewards to teach something new as you have to punish to get rid of something you don't want. It's much harder work, right? If you actually want to teach your child not to run into the street, you can beat them when they do, but then you need to hold their hand and take them to the corner and tell them to look both ways and practice it and say, good job, 5 times, and then you can let your kid walk off by themselves and cross the street, right? Increased positive parent-child interactions, as the Jamaican Risk and Resiliency Survey tells us. We must increase motivation and engagement. We have to give people reasons to do the right thing. Just to tell them it is the right thing, not to show them the path, doesn't work very well. Right? So we need a motivational approach, which Dee Dee will talk to us about a little later. We need to be culturally competent. Right? When I come to you and say, do not spank your children, I have to understand the cultural context of that. And how do I mean? We need to be able to talk about it in the context of our culture. And that can cross lines of class and race and religion, and we have to learn how to talk to people in language they can understand. We have to have the family be the source of the change. We have to empower parents to parent their children, give them the tools and the authority that they need. I heard poor Betty Ann said the state should be a model of parenting yesterday, and the crowd went, because we must empower parents, right? And that's what she meant too. But I knew that's what you meant. You have to empower the families to raise their children. And intensive case management, what I mean by that is, it's not a mere, you just can't send in the doctor to have a talk with Tony and his mom. You can't just send in the pastor or the psychiatrist. You have to have an intensive community involvement. You have to follow up. You have to be there. So the model we have for this of how children develop is called the social ecological model. And all it means is that children grow up in a social environment, and that environment is an ecology just like our physical world. That in that environment are the teen themselves, surrounded by their family, that has that great influence we've been talking about earlier, that are then surrounded by their peers out in the world, the other kids their age, and then school, and then neighborhood, right? We can put the church in there, we can put the government in there, right? There are all these systems that are influencing the lives of the teen influences the lives of those systems, and solutions and problems flow in both directions. So if there's problem behavior, we have problems in the caregiver system, in the peer system, in the school system, in the neighborhood system, they're all contributing. And if the teen is doing well, we call it pro-social behavior, right? They're learning and growing and doing the things that they do. They're working and going to school and recreating and going to church and being confirmed and doing all the things that adolescents need to do to develop. So some of the tools we use in this multi-systems approach is first to recognize this family tradition, to recognize that the family is important. And we draw a picture called a genogram in our work, where we actually look at the relationships across generations among family members. And we do this with the family, we map it out, and we take the focus away from Tony as the problem to Tony in a system that has created these problems in some ways long before Tony was born, right? And so we have little codes here, and so you'll see the grandfather was an alcoholic and died of liver disease, right? Mother was married to the man in prison and had Tony and his sister. His sister, like so many girls we were learning yesterday, has been sexually abused and removed from her home and living with the grandmother. Christine herself is in recovery, but had problems with alcohol and drug abuse in Tony's life. And then Tony has all this conflict with the significant other, the boyfriend. And so that picture alone is an intervention, by the way. When Christine says, "Fix my son," which she often says, that mother often says that to me, right? Like I'm the handyman, like I'm the auto mechanic. Fix my son, he's making a funny noise. I'm like, well, I don't think it's the power steering. I think it's a system. I think it's a system, and we're going to have to work. We're going to have to bring in the 25-year-old reluctant boyfriend, and we're going to have to read those letters that Dad's writing to Tony from prison, and we're going to have to look at what is he saying to Tony. And we're going to have to bring in grandmother and sister, and we might have to get help for sister. Grandmother might need some medical intervention to prolong her life. You might need some support for your recovery. My goodness, you have a lot of stress right now. I'm worried about that. So we say it's a system, and that's what we're going to treat. And then we go beyond that. We go beyond that, and we look at the strengths and the needs in all of the systems. And we might have to work in the school. And we might have to walk the streets of Canterbury like we're going to do, and go into the neighborhood. We might have to talk to the pastor. We might have to talk to the coach. And we might have to bring them all in. And we need to know what's working in those systems and what's not working in those systems and why that's causing a problem. Now, this is a huge undertaking. And you're saying, Dr. Stewart, did you bring wheelbarrows of money with you to help us do our work? But the fact is, these systemic interventions are simply being strategic about what we already do. We already know that for Tony to change, it's going to take a massive effort, right? That Dr. Stewart doesn't have any magic words, right? That the pastor doesn't have a magic bullet. We all have contributions. We have the truth. We have the way, we have the light, but Tony needs help and his family needs help, and they need practical, real help to do this. And so we look in all of these systems and say, what is there that we can build on, and what is there that we need to change? And it's not a matter of throwing more money at the problem or throwing more resources necessarily. It's stopping what I call random acts of intervention, right? Does someone know there's a problem? Let's run over and fix Tony. oh, Christine's having a problem, let's do this. Instead, let's take a systemic look at what's going on. And so that's what we do in multi-systemic interventions. And we actually think about the problems, right, as having contributions from all of these systems, right? That if Tony's using ganja every day, what's causing that? Well, his friends use it, he doesn't go to school, he doesn't have any incentives to do something positive, no one even notices if Tony does something nice or responsible. He's addicted to it perhaps. His father used it. He also sells it, it's always available to him. He has no prospect for job, he has no activities, and no one watches him. He runs wild. He does what he wants. Okay, so that's a systemic look at that problem. It's not just a matter of putting a bumper sticker on his car that say, you know, drugs plus gangs equal, drugs plus dope equals no hope, right? We don't just give him a bumper sticker or a slogan or tell him to stop it. We have to look at why is this kid using drugs every day? And then he fights and he's aggressive, and we look at that. Why is he fighting and aggressive? Well, he's dysregulated, he's reactive, and he's impulsive. His peers egg him on. He has no positive activity. He gets respected money. He gets out of his schoolwork. And then we start seeing patterns. He has no incentive to do something positive. His father encourages him to man up. He has unsupervised time. And when you start looking systemically, then you start getting what the fit shows. What does Tony need? Tony needs supervised time. Tony needs a positive male role model. He's getting beaten by the 25-year-old, the 40 is in prison, giving him bad messages. Tony needs incentives to do the right things. And I'm not talking about necessarily bribes or rewards or just incentives, someone to notice, right? Why do we persist in our work and our education, our struggles? Why do we write those papers and do those problems? Because someone has told us they want us to do that, and someone will say, good job, when we do it, or at least notice if we don't do it. So how can we help? How can we help Tony get these things? I don't have wheelbarrows of money. I just have people. What can we do to help Tony get these things he needs? We can ask someone to mentor him. What else? Yes, ma'am. You want a mic? She wants a microphone. Someone needs to show Tony love and support. Have some networking to help him. We need to get a team on board, right? Tony needs a team. We need a team to come down from Seattle. Tony needs a team, right? All right, what else? We need Tony to have buy-in to this, right? And I keep poor Dee Dee's getting so much pressure. I keep referring to Dee Dee's presentation. It's all about how do we get Tony to have buy-in. Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering if you could actually ask him to do some kind of reflection.
Yes.
And from the reflection, you would do some kind of reflexivity of his life, and then now see how from that reflection, you can then chart the path in which you want him to go. Or ask him to tell you the path in which he wants to go from the reflection.
I like that. I'm gonna bother poor Dee Dee again and say reflection is part of what she does. But I will say that when children are traumatized, one of the things that they need is an ability to tell their story in whatever way and pace they need, and to reflect on what's happened. Tony's just existing. He's just surviving, right? And Dr. John and Dr. Kira talked about this yesterday, right? You need to have that space to have a narrative to grieve, right? And to understand what's happened to you. Yes, sir.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
There are many cases of Tonys.
Yes, sir.
On Monday, I had my Tony, and I'll try to brief. He attended school, a particular school in St. Elizabeth, and there was some tip with some of the students. Machete, or machete as you call it, was introduced.
Yes.
In order to prevent sort of chaos, we found him, disarmed him, took the machete away from him,
Yes.
calmed him down.
Yes.
And I was pleased with myself having, taken this
Yes.
kind of initiative. On the way back down, I realized, hell, I disarmed the guy, but I left him vulnerable.
Yes.
Because others
Yes.
who wanted to attack him.
right.
One of the things that we ought to do, or should be aware of, is once we have disarmed them, there must be a system of protecting,
Yes.
following up,
Yes.
and guiding.
And I think you're expanding on supervision in a very clear way. We need to be there, right? They need to have adult eyes on them that de-escalates the situation, and then they need follow-up, and they need someone watching them, someone getting them from point A to point B safely, right? Because our children we can't take for granted, and children can't take for granted that just movement from point A to point B. That's the level of supervision they need. I agree.
I think that one of the things that I'm definitely passionate about, because I love children, is the humility of our parents.
Yes.
It's very important. The Word of God says that parents don't provoke your children to wrath.
Yes.
And even in the scenario with Tony, we saw so many different
Yes.
situations where the parents' behavior clearly was a reflection of
Yes.
how his response to
Yes.
their behavior
Yes.
towards him, or just in general, their lack of responsibility and good parenting. And I find that especially in Jamaica, I've just observed that the culture is different. As you can hear, we beat here and in the Caribbean. And beating is not the problem. It's more so that parents are not repentant when they are responsible for an action.
That's right.
They're not repentant when they have done something
That's
to
right.
contribute to the child's actions.
That's
The
right.
child has a choice. And as I was trying to point out earlier, we don't have to live or be products of our parents'
That's right.
behavior.
That's right.
But I do believe that the parents need to humble themselves and repent, because it is a vital part of the children's healing process and them being able to submit to you, to obey you,
Yes.
and to see you as an example. I think it's one of the most crucial things that comes in a person like Tony coming to a place of healing and walking in the way that a child his age should be walking.
That's right. I like the way you're expanding on these simple things that Tony needs, because he needs complicated things too. His mother needs help, right? Not parenting classes or education thrown at her, but she needs a real collaboration and a partnership with someone, right, to help her parent, right? I would send her to you. That was wonderful advice. Tony needs skills. I would send him to you. How do you de-escalate a problem and be safe? Right? So they need this intense skills. I can take another question that I'm going to yield to Dr. Davidson.
Okay, just a couple of things. One, in terms of parenting and discipline. One of the books that my wife and I read early in our marriage, I think before we actually started having children, was Dr. Dobson's Dare to Discipline. Is a very, very good book. And also his book called The Strong-Willed Child. It deals with how to administer discipline in an effective way. If beating or spanking needs to be administered, how to administer it so that it doesn't leave the child scarred and you with a guilty conscience. Also for Tony, in terms of supervised time, he needs, I think, some extracurricular activities that are centered around things that he's interested in. So that would help to give him some supervised time.
Thank you. So when the team gets together, right, we can come up with interventions in all these systems, and the answer to everyone is yes, you're all right, this is what he needs. It's an overwhelming task in many ways. It requires a network and communication among everyone who's providing help. We all get together and we want the same thing for Tony, and we have different gifts to bring, and we have different resources. The last thing I'll leave you with is, I told you at the start I'm a scientist and I'm a professor, and one of the things I love to teach is the way we come at problems as scientists is that we don't know. We don't know the answer, but we will test things and see if they work. And this is the same loop we would do for Tony. What's the problem? He has all kinds of problems, but what's the problem we're going to work on? Set goals. Find the fit. What's going on in the system to cause this problem? Develop an intervention, and I have the frogs here because there's a proverb that says, this is an Asian proverb, 5 frogs are sitting on a lily pad and one of them decides to jump off. How many are on the lily pad? 5. Deciding to jump off and jumping off isn't the same thing. So we can sit around and talk about Tony like we're doing now all day. This is what he needs this, he needs that. We can design the intervention, and then you have to intervene. And if we think Tony needs to reflect, or Tony's mom needs to learn humble parenting, or Tony needs extracurricular activities and a mentor, or Tony needs de-escalation and violence techniques, then we need to do it, and then figure out if it worked. And if he needed those things on Thursday this week, he needs those things Thursday next week, right? And so when we come back to it, we call it the loop. We follow up like the Samaritan. Here's some money to start. I'll come back next week and see how he's doing and if you need anything else. Yes, ma'am. The fit is just this process of doing the fit, sorry. Yeah, no, it's just fit. I capitalized it. Just bad grammar. I know. I spared you today. I have many of them. And so what that means is, and this is exactly what we were talking about with what if Tony doesn't want to do it, right? So Tony and Christine don't show up. We set up all of these things for them. They didn't even bother to come. And so we just do another fit. Tony doesn't want to change. Christine works and goes to school. They needed to care for the sister. Grandma's sick. Carlos, the boyfriend, was angry about them talking to us and discouraged them from coming. Pastor did not call to remind them. We told him to call and remind them. And so we do the fit again, and then we intervene on the barriers, and then we do it again. And that's the commitment that Tony requires, right? We already brought him to my office, and he talked to us for 5 years, and we didn't do anything because he needs the team. Thank you. We're going to come back and talk a little bit more this afternoon, and I will turn it back over to Reverend Milton. Thank you so much.
And we've done much of the question answering in process. So now we just ask you to stand a little bit. And is there a particular chorus we can sing, an expression of what God has been doing in our midst? Can you come up with one for us, please? What was